Let's now take a look at one of the lesser used forms of factoring and solving. It's called completing the square. All right. Now, when it comes to completing the square, we really only want to do this when the instructions tell us to use it, because in other cases, something like X factor or other methods would probably be better, a little bit faster, but if it tells us to do it, we've got to do it. So I've got the steps, and we're going to apply those to our first problem here, and it's going to tell us solve using complete the square. So we're locked in, we've got to use complete the square. Here we go. So our first example, x squared minus 12x minus 45 equals 0. Now looking at this, if they hadn't told us to use complete the square, x factor looks really good for this. There's 3 terms, it's in standard form, it's set equal to 0, this thing's ready to go. Unfortunately, they do tell us complete the square. So let's follow the steps. First step, don't set it equal to 0, set it equal to the constant number. So the constant, remember, is the number that's all by itself, the 45. So I've got to get it set equal to that. So I'm going to move it to the other side by adding it. So rewriting this, we got x squared minus 12x equals a positive 45 now. And you'll notice I'm leaving space here because step 2 says put a blank space on both sides of the equal sign. So plus blank here, plus blank here. It's all about equality. What I do to one side, I do the other. We're not changing the value of this equation, we're just changing how it looks. All right. Step 3, take b and divide it by 2. Now, since it was in standard form, there's an a, there's a b, and there's a c. A being 1, b being negative 12, and b is what we want. So I'm going to take that off to the side here. B is negative 12. Whatever number that is, go ahead and divide it by 2. Negative 12 divided by 2 is negative 6. Step 4, square that number. So we're going to take that, negative 6, and we're going to square it. So negative 6 squared is a positive 36. That number is going to go into those 2 blanks. Put that number in both blanks. So a 36 here, 36 here. Step 6, simplify the right-hand side. So on the right-hand side of the equal sign, the 45 and the 36 make an 81. On this side, we're going to write it in the squared version. That's where the square part of completing the square comes from. It's going to be a set of parentheses and it's going to be squared. So if we were to factor this, we would get the same binomial twice. That's the square part of it. There's 2 of them. It's squared. We're going to write the x, and in the second blank, you're going to want to put b over 2. Now remember, b was negative 12 over 2. That term that we're going to put in there is the one right above our 36, the negative 6. So right here it's going to go negative 6. So this is completing the square. If I told you to factor completing the square, we would stop there. But they want us to solve it. So we want to get x by itself. We want to solve it. Exponent 2 tells me there should be 2 answers, but I can't get to the x yet because it's locked inside the parentheses with the exponent 2. In order to get rid of exponent 2, we need a square root because that symbol will cancel out the 2. But what I do to one side, I need to do to the other. So I've got x minus 6 equals, remember 2 answers, square root of 81 becomes a plus or minus 9. Now we technically have 2 equations kind of jammed here together. We have the x minus 6 equals a positive 9, and then the x minus 6 equals a negative 9. And now we've got 2 equations with 2 answers. On the left-hand side, if I add 6 over, my final answer is 15. Over here, if I add 6 over, my final answer is negative 3. And these are the 2 answers for this equation. Now if I look above, because remember back up here, we said that we might be able to use x factor. Let's see if I did use it. So this is just for fun. Negative 45 is my top number. My bottom number is negative 12. The 2 numbers that multiply to give me negative 45 and add to give me negative 12 are a negative 15 and positive 3. And remember, once you set those in the parentheses equal to 0 and solve them, your answers would be the opposite. x equals positive 15, x equals negative 3, and those are the values that we got down here. So either method would have worked out. Obviously some are faster than others, but if they tell you to use a specific one, unfortunately we have to do it. So let's try another completing the square problem. So we're going to imagine it tells us to use completing the square. X squared minus 14x minus 70 equals 2. We don't even want it equal to 0. We want it set equal to the constant. So we got to move our constant numbers over. So that's a plus 70. Plus 70. So we've got x squared minus 14x plus a blank, because we know we need that blank eventually. 72 over here, plus another blank. And let's do the math. Now remember, it says take b, pull that off to the side and work with it. So negative 14, always divided by 2. That's a negative 7. Whatever that number is, you square it. That's a 49. And that's the number that goes back into these blanks. We clean up the right-hand side. 72 and 49 make 121. And then over here, we want to write it as a nice perfect square. We write the x, and then we write the value above what we just wrote, negative 7. And we're going to go ahead and solve for x. I need to get that x out of the parentheses. I need to square root it to cancel out this exponent 2. What I do to one side, I do the other. And that's a good way to check. Usually, on these completing the square problems, if it gives you a nice square rootable number over here, like plus or minus 11, then you're usually on the right track. X minus 7 is still on the left. And now we go ahead and split this into two problems. One with a positive 11, the other with a negative 11. And finally, just solving these out, when we add 7 on both sides, we get an 18. Adding 7 over here, we get a negative 4. And there's my two answers for this. So one last one for these notes. Y squared plus 2 minus 4y equals 7. Things are a little out of order, but still we want all the constants over here on the right, so that's actually the 2 we're going to move. So y squared minus 4y plus a blank equals, that's a 5, plus another blank. Let's find out what goes in the blank. I take b, it's a negative 4. I divide it by 2, that's a negative 2. I square that, it's a 4. 4 goes here, 4 goes here, and look, we made a 9, which is nice and square rootable. Y, we're going to put in this number, negative 2 squared. This time we're just solving for y instead of x, but it's still really not a big difference. Square root cancels out the exponent 2, square root that side. Y minus 2 equals plus or minus 3. We're able to now split this into two problems. One with the positive 3, one with a negative 3. First answer when I add 2 over is 5. Other answer when I add 2 over, negative 1. So again, the thing to remember here, let's see, don't want it equal to 0, we want it equal to the constants, and then we just follow the steps, putting those blanks, finding out what goes in the blanks, and how to complete this square and solve it. Get us all the way to a final 2 answers most times.